Yeah, come in. I did my research topic on physical activity and bullying behaviors. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of my study, I'm going to go through the purpose, the methods, results, discussions, and limits and future research recommendations. Well, I think the first question is, why study bullying and physical activity? Some alarming evidence supports that it is a really relevant problem in today's society. It's reported nearly in every single public school in the U.S. It happens at least on a weekly basis, at least once a week. And then, there is some serious consequences towards not only the victim, but the aggressor. That is really relevant, especially in today's society. And then last but not least, this is kind of the reason why I did this study, is physical activity and bullying behaviors. There is a positive link, hence why I'm doing the study. So the purpose of my study is to examine the relationship between physical activity and bullying behaviors, victimization, aggression among adolescents. So we'll get into the methods now. So we were actually going to do high school students, but the reason why we didn't is because of one, convenient sampling, and then two, we looked, as I was going through the literature review, we saw that middle school peaks overall compared to high school and elementary, and sometimes even alternative schools on bullying overall volume, the highest reported incidents. So my research, we took 40 middle school students from just a rural community school and about 35 minutes away from here. Their middle school range is a little different than I'm used to, 5th to 8th grade. So obviously, we tried to make our data collection as convenient as possible, making sure they understand, making sure everything goes from A to Z. Average age range about 10 to 14 years old, and then the vast majority of the race, ethnicity of our groups for my study was 60% Caucasian. So with trying to find a survey that's adequate, we really tried to look for a solid one, and we did find one. So the instrumentation that we used to measure victimization and perpetration broke down in two different parts. The victimization was called the FSBV, and then the FBSP to measure perpetration. Really, the survey broke down to a 10 common Likert scale, and asked the participants how often they were bullied, 1 being never, 5 being several times a week in the past 2 months. Again, past 2 months, we really tried to make sure a 5th grade understands, can they remember what happened a week ago to a month ago, right? And fortunately from us, the exactly same process and procedure and the format of questions were the same thing for perpetrator. So, 10 Likert scale, 1 being never, 5 being several times a week.
You said 1 to 5?
1, this never happened, and then 5 several times a week.
What about 10?
When
You said you use a 10 Likert scale. which means the range should be 1 to,
Yeah, I think they broke it down like different segments, like 1 through 5 here, and then another 1 through 5.
It's really fine.
Um, So with that being said, we wanted to make sure that our scale is backed by evidence, the utilization of collecting data. And so does this provide evidence? Absolutely. We found a study that looked at the internal consistency that was high for both sections, victimization, perpetration. And then we also find a study that did the Cronbach alpha and got those measurements. And then we also found a study that conducted a factor analysis and found that both constructs to be adequate. I think the physical activity questionnaire probably was a little more difficult just because we have, at Jessup, we have kids who range from extremely athletic to, you get the leisure activity, right? So you have to extrapolate, try to take everybody into consideration and make it functional and accurate, right? So we found, did find a good survey that it's called the Golden Shepherd Leisure Time Physical Activity Questionnaire that asks participants to recall frequency of physical activity greater than 15 minutes within the last 7 days. And again, the last 7 days, we tried to make it simple for 5th graders all the way to 8th grade. And I think another thing we tried to do is make sure that it didn't take from the time of learning students in classrooms. This questionnaire broke down to different modalities: strenuous, strenuous, moderate, and mild. So, for example, strenuous could be anything from hockey, soccer, running. Moderate would be something like baseball, tennis, and dancing, and then mild would be yoga, bowling, and golf. I think taking into consideration, looking at all the scores, you gotta ask yourself, how do you score all this? And the good thing is this survey already has the computation formula for us, which was equivalent to the MET computation. And basically, based on activity, you would calculate the number associated to the modality activity, right? Strenuous would be 9, mild, moderate would be 5, and then mild. Again, can't just pick out a questionnaire. You got to make sure it's backed by research. So we did find that this is supported. And actually, an interesting caveat a little bit is this was actually originally made for adults, but further validated for children and adolescents. So that was really interesting to see. Another thing that we saw was it was a study to back it up was an active graph measurement of physical activity during the fall and spring of the school year, and again showed significant correlation. And then the last thing we looked at is strong test retest, and that showed a strong correlation as well. So. So data analysis, I think with the time frame we had, we wanted to make sure we were punctual, but make sure we understand what we're doing. So the thing that we did was descriptive statistics were used to help to understand demographics of our sample and a standard deviation frequency of bullying and engagement of physical activity. The last thing we did to make sure we get the data was T-test inferential statistics were used to compare between victims and non-victims for different physical activity variables. Okay, so this is the result of my study. Now, unfortunately, didn't find big significant findings, but we measured a lot of different variables, right? Starting off with victimization, levels of moderate vigorous activity, and total physical activity. For the victims of bullying were not significantly different from those reported by children who were never victimized. Although this is not significant, it was interesting that we found that victims of bullying did report lower levels of moderate vigorous physical activity in total physical activity than those never victimized. The next slide will help understand what I just said, in descriptive statistics. The next variable we looked at was aggression, of course, right? So levels of moderate vigorous and moderate vigorous in total physical activity. Victims of bullying were not significantly different from those reported by children who were never aggressors. Again, the thing that we found is interesting, not significant, but aggressors did report slightly higher levels of moderate vigorous activity in total physical activity than those who were never bullies. This is the descriptive statistics. Again, so gender, we looked at gender as well. So we looked at, girls were significantly less active than boys for moderate vigorous activity in total physical activity. Thing that we did find actually was girls and boys did report participating in similar levels of moderate physical activity. Lastly, girls did also report marginally non-significant but higher victimization scores. Another variable we looked at was grade, right? So again, unfortunately, there was no significant difference among students in different grade levels for moderate vigorous activity and total physical activity, victimization, and aggression. Thing that we did find, although not significant, victimization, aggression scores did go up as academic grades went up. Grades. So moving forward in the discussion, again, we wanted to recap the study. We wanted to make sure that the aim of the purpose of the study was to examine relationships between physical activity and physical activity. Sorry, and bullying. Sorry. Although, again, the conclusion of the study, we didn't find any significant, but you'll see in our later slide the limitations. Of course, that being said, we understand from previous research that mental distress goes up. We know that lower academic performance drops significantly. We know that higher levels of loneliness happens as well. Psychiatric problems, the antisocial personality disorder. We see this a lot in today's society, whether it's relevant or very, very close to the situation or 20 years down the road. Physical activity. The reason why there's two arrows is there's conflicting results, and then criminal behaviors goes up too as well. Limitations. Basically, we understand that the pool size was sample pool size was not there. Usually, we understand that you need at least 100 to 200 samples. Of course, trying to get that diversity population was not. It was only majority of one race. I think future recommendations would be interesting to get a bystander part perspective on looking at research. And then modalities of fitness. So based off of like hockey players and young athletes, what does a bullying relationship look like? And then the athletic population, right? And I think most overall, I think an observational study of bullying would be really, really interesting, right? Looking at from the point A all the way to point Z, looking to see what happens.